Welcome. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up. Very, very interesting report coming this morning from Rob Demovsky. I say this morning, Tuesday morning, depending on when you watch this, revolving around Jaire Alexander. I'll post the tweet up on the screen, but Rob Demovsky saying, according to a source, the Packers and Jaire Alexander continue to talk about a possible resolution, which could include a reconciliation to where Alexander plays for the Packers in 2025. After all options are still on the table: release, trade, or return. It really seemed like a foregone conclusion that Jaire had played his last down in Green Bay. It sounded like the team had grown, more and more frustrated with the missed games, which isn't all Jaire's problem. You can't predict injuries, and he's missed 34 of the last 68 regular season games for the Packers. I think really the problem elevated, or the fracture grew to be too big last year when there was a point in time where Jaire was logging full practices for a full week with the Packers and then still wasn't playing in the games, where it almost seemed like Green Bay was like, yeah, he seems like he should be good to go. Like, there's no real risk with him. He's fine. He should be out there, but Jaire still wasn't out there. That seemed to be the big fracture between the two sides. And all offseason, all we've heard is, Goody would like to get a trade done. He'd like some draft compensation, and the draft kind of seemed like a natural pivot point where the Packers could dish Jaire, send him somewhere else. Both sides are happy, you would imagine. There were reports that there was a team interested in Jaire and believed to have offered draft compensation that was to the Packers' liking, but it circulated around Jaire restructuring his contract with the team that would be trading for him. He didn't want to do that, and so that fell apart. I have said, you can go back and watch recent videos, and if you watch the videos on this channel, you'll remember me saying multiple times, to me, what made sense for both sides, maybe more for the Packers side, is to put ego aside, to put pride aside, and to just figure it out. Because coming into the draft and really coming into the offseason, if we all put it in the category of, let's assume Jaire Alexander's gone, you all of a sudden have a pretty big need at cornerback, in my opinion at least, and in the opinion of many others. Green Bay goes out in free agency. They bring in Nate Hobbs from Las Vegas. Good corner. Is he a number one? I have my doubts. And if he's not your number one, then Keyshawn Nixon is. Is Keyshawn Nixon a true number one cornerback? When you have wide receivers in the division like Justin Jefferson, DJ Moore, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams. I love Keyshawn Nixon. He's a pit bull. I love his tenacity, his fiery personality, the leadership he brings to the locker room. But over the course of a 17-game season, can Keyshawn Nixon be a number one cornerback in the NFL, especially in this division with these wide receivers? I have my doubts. And that's not a huge knock on Keyshawn Nixon. I just don't know. He believes he's a true number one, and I love that he oozes that confidence. But going into this offseason, knowing what we did, believing that Jaire was going to be sent packing, was going to get traded elsewhere, or maybe the Packers release him, you knew there was a need at corner. And so far, Goody and company have addressed it with a signing of Nate Hobbs, which is fine. Doesn't, really move the needle a whole lot. And then in the draft, they took Micah Robinson, 7th-round corner out of Tulane, who was great for Tulane. 4 years at Furman, played great at the FCS level, comes to the FBS level, plays great for Tulane. Could be a teams guy right out of the chute for the Packers. But in a draft where you thought, man, if they can thread the needle and find value with best available on their board, but also fulfill a need at corner, you'd love to see Green Bay do that early in the draft. And instead they went, wide receiver, tackle, wide receiver in the first 3 rounds. And so it left you thinking. I said in an article I wrote, with how the draft transpired for Green Bay, it honestly had me, and the fact that they didn't trade Jaire during it, and how they came out on the other side, it had me thinking, like, are they considering bringing back Jaire? Because if not, there's a lot of eggs being put in the basket of, hey, Keyshawn Nixon and Hobbs being a more than formidable, being a really, really good 1-2 punch at corner. Like, that's what you're banking in on if you're the Packers. And just so much of this with Jaire, because if you remember back in January and even at the owners' meetings in April, Goody had mentioned, we can bring back Jaire if we want. It's not a financial thing. Is he getting paid top of the market money for a corner? Yeah, but he's not holding down like Green Bay's cap number by any stretch of the imagination. There's flexibility. The issue was purely availability, and the belief that last year there were times where the Packers clearly thought Jaire can go, and Jaire saying, no, I'm not good to go. I can't play, even after logging full practices throughout the week. And so now you have Rob Demovsky, who's been adamant all offseason. He's kind of been, for all the Packers reporters, he's been the one to stick his neck out the most with his reporting and his sourcing, and I'm sure he's got, good sourcing. But it's really been Demovsky saying, yeah, this is a done deal. Jaire's gone. One way or another, he won't be back with the Packers. So to have it be a complete 180 and see him be the reporter today, Tuesday, saying, there could be a reconciliation that has Jaire playing for the Packers in 2025. I'm telling you, folks, if Jaire's back with the Packers this year, that's secondary. When he's on the field, he's still playing at a premier cornerback level. It's just the availability. And to me, I had said previously, I just thought it was worth the risk. Because you're not going to get a first or a second or even a third round pick, I wouldn't imagine, for Jaire Alexander. And you get some of that money off the books, sure. But is there a plan in place to fill that void outside of just crossing your fingers that Keyshawn Nixon and Hobbs can hold down the fort? And I like Carrington Valentine too. And I think if Carrington Valentine's your third best corner, in theory, you should be doing pretty good, because I think I'd say a handful of teams where Carrington Valentine could be your number 2 corner. So in theory, it sounds great that he's your number 3, but again, do you have a number 1? That's the problem. And with Jaire, you have the number 1, but how many games are you going to get out of him? But because there isn't a huge financial burden that this is taking on Green Bay, given how they've, ventured about getting who they have, to me, it just made sense to just bring him back. You're rolling the dice, hoping that he can stay healthy. But in my opinion, you're rolling the dice by trading him too, because you don't have a contingency plan in place that's rock solid. Again, outside of banking in on Nixon and Hobbs to really elevate their games to another level. And maybe that happens. Maybe year 2 in Jeff Hafley's system, Keyshawn Nixon's even better than year 1. And I thought Keyshawn Nixon, he had a good 2024 season. There were some moments that make you want to pull your hair out. That's kind of the case with every player if you really do a deep dive into it. My concern was not having Jaire in the fold. To me, there's a clear need, an issue that needs to be addressed of not having a top corner. And with Jaire, you're running the risk of availability. But to me, it's worth it. Instead of at this point in the offseason trading him for a 2026 fourth rounder, maybe you get a 4th and a 6th or something like that. I hope there is a reconciliation. I want Jaire on the Packers in 2025 because while there's a lot of unpredictability of injuries with any player when they could pop up, but certainly with someone like Jaire, who again has missed 34 of the last 68 regular season games, you're talking about 50% of the time him being in the lineup and 50% of the time being out of the lineup. To me, it's just with where they're at now, it's worth the roll of the dice to just bring Jaire back. To me, it makes more sense to do that. And so if both sides can put aside ego, can put aside their differences, and just come to these terms, I think it's better off for the Packers. You talk about a secondary where, let's say Jaire's back. You have a secondary then where your top 4 corners, it just looks so much more, it's more aesthetically pleasing to look at the depth chart and see Jaire, Keyshawn, Hobbs, and Carrington Valentine. And then, at safety, we have Xavier McKinney, Evan Williams, Javon Bullard. Like, it gives you so much flexibility for when Jaire is available, is playing for you, because he's your number 1 corner. And then do you put Keyshawn in the slot or on the outside? Do you put Hobbs on the outside or in the slot? What do you do with Javon Bullard? Like, you go from, man, do we have a true number one corner in this room, to holy crap, we have an embarrassment of riches, not only in the cornerback room, but in the secondary. You have so many options, so many ways you can already use Javon Bullard, Keyshawn Nixon, and Hobbs if Jaire Alexander is to play for the green and gold in 2025. So, this report, it's not an indication that anything is finalized one way or another, but it does crack the door open to the idea that, hey, both sides could filter this through and work it out to where Jaire's playing for the Packers in 2025. And I'm telling you, I think that's the best case scenario. You look at up and down the board, heading into the offseason, what were the priorities we were talking about for the Packers from a roster standpoint? It was wide receiver, it was cornerback, it was edge rusher. Well, at wide receiver, you used a first and a third round pick. Matthew Golden, Savion Williams. And Savion Williams is more of a gadget player, right? I did a video on that. You can go back and watch it. But Matthew Golden, you hope, maybe not this year, but he develops into your bona fide alpha number one wide receiver. And so we don't know if that will happen. But in terms of, hey, did Green Bay address this in the offseason? Wide receiver, check the box. Cornerback, you bring in Hobbs, you use a seventh rounder. Hard to say they fully addressed it. Bringing back Jaire, if you do that, check that box. On the edge, we heard Goody say all offseason, they believe they have the pieces in place now. They waited until a fourth round pick to take an edge rusher. They didn't do anything with it in free agency. They did, however, fired their defensive line coach and bring in DeMarcus Covington from New England, who was the defensive coordinator in 2024, but was the defensive line coach 3 years prior to that consecutively for the New England Patriots. To me, Goody looked at it, Matt LaFleur looked at it, and they said, we just need to shake it up with the coaching. And so they bring in Covington, and there is a lot of trust and a lot of faith being put into Covington being the answer, being the key to unlocking a Lucas Van Ness, to having Rashawn Gary find consistency again, to having Kenny Clark go back to having more than one sack in a season despite starting and playing in every game like he did in 2024. Just across the board, it needs to get better. They believe they have the pieces in place at edge rusher. We'll see. Maybe the coaching change. Like, I look at the Cleveland Cavaliers for a comparison to this. Like, last year, I think the Cavs won, 48 games, 47 games, something like that. They were a 4 or a 5 seed. And they fired their coach, J.B. Bickerstaff. And they kept all the same pieces in place this year. Every single one. All they did in the offseason basically was switch out Bickerstaff for Kenny Atkinson. They win 64 games. Now, they relied on internal growth on the roster. Evan Mobley took a step forward. Darius Garland got back to his old ways of being a consistent player, and Ty Jerome took a step forward. But Cleveland thought, hey, we just need to shake up the coaching staff and then believe that there's going to be growth from some of our young guys. Green Bay looked at its situation and said, we have some young guys. Lucas Van Ness, Carl Brooks. We believe those guys will take steps forward. Brenton Cox Jr. with his opportunities. The young guys will take a step forward. The vets like Rashawn Gary and Kenny Clark will find stable ground again. What we really need to do is switch up the coaching. And so they bring in Covington. And so that's TBD. Cornerback was still an area of concern, leaving the first few waves of free agency, even though they brought in Hobbs, and post-draft. Bringing Jaire back to me just solves the puzzle. And again, do you expect to have him for all 17 games? No. But let's say you get 12 regular season games and he's healthy for the postseason. If I told you right now, you can have Jaire for 11 to 12 games in the regular season, and he's good to go for the playoffs. Doesn't everyone say, yeah, bring him back this year? Like, yeah, I sign up for that. That's what the hope is if you're the Packers. It makes more sense to keep him around than to trade him off for one late 2026 pick or two late 2026 picks. If the Packers were tied up financially and they were weighing this, like, man, we don't have a lot of wiggle room. We have our backs up against the wall as it pertains to the salary cap. We don't have a lot of flexibility. Look at Jaire's contract. Look at how he's missed 50% of the games in the last 68 regular season contests. Then I'd be like, okay, let's call a spade a spade. It's probably best for both parties to part ways. Because the financial aspect really isn't in flux for Green Bay, it isn't tying them up. But there is a concern about what you have in that corner room at the top of the depth chart as it pertains to having a true number one. Just bring him back. It makes the most sense to do so. So I hope there is a resolution, a reconciliation that results in both sides saying, you know what, let's let bygones be bygones. Come on back for 2025. Big report from Rob Demovsky on this Tuesday morning, circulating around Jaire Alexander. I hope he's back. I think this, not only the cornerback room, but the secondary looks so much better with him in the mix than playing somewhere else. And there's a risk to bringing him back. I've brought it up. We get it. It's worth the risk. It's worth the risk because without having Jaire Alexander, you're taking a risk too. You're taking a gamble that Keyshawn Nixon and Hobbs are going to be able to take their game to another level. Jaire still plays the position at a top-tier level. You just need him to be available. So we'll see what happens. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciate all the support. We'll see you next time.